Hi, Namaskaram. Today I'll be talking about downside risk ratio, another key metric in analyzing the fund. It gives you a lot of insights. In the last session, I spoke about two parameters, value metrics, namely standard deviation and Sharpe's index numbers. Let me recap those value metrics because the downside risk ratio is an extension of the same logic, but interpreted in a different context. Um, uh, standard deviation measures the dispersion of values, dispersion of actual returns from the expected returns. Defines a value range in which the actual performance of the fund or anything, of the fund, uh, or the security. Say securities performance. Um, I gave you examples in cricket. By taking a batsman average as 50 with a standard deviation of 10% means that a batsman's actual performance can lie anywhere between 45 and 55. Means that there is a possibility that he could score 45 runs or a possibility that he could score 55 runs. Now, let me talk about Sharpe's index. I'll be talking about downside risk with respect to these parameters very shortly. Sharpe's index basically um, measures the possibilities uh, uh, of the fund generating returns more than the risk-free return or the threshold value. Risk-free return is the minimum return that the investor would expect by investing in a safer investment option. For instance, you have a choice between mutual funds and FD. FD, say you are assured of 5%. Mutual funds, you don't know. You will have returns above 5%, or sometimes the market performs badly. You will have returns below 5%. So as an investor, I just want to safeguard my interest. I want to safeguard my interest. So I will look at. I want to find out whether the fund generates at least 5%. So Sharpe's index number is a very good measure. It's a metric that evaluates the fund's return. That checks whether the fund would return a value greater than the threshold value. We saw ideal numbers for Sharpe index number. Anything between 1 and 2 is considered good. Anything above 3 is excellent. So this is about standard deviation and Sharpe index number. So what does downside risk ratio? What is downside risk ratio? As we saw that in standard deviation defines two limits. One is the upper limit, and another is the downside limit. We want to know. As an investor, I want to know what is the probability of my investment falling below the downside limit, or in the sense, I want to know whether the fund would generate a return greater than the risk-free return. Risk-free return, in the sense, here denotes an investment that would give you assured return, like your FDs or RDs or government securities. So downside is return. What will be says that what are the chances of one losing its investment? So I'll tell you how it is calculated. Let us take expected returns for five. I mean expected returns uh, mm, of the market for 5 years. Then let us detect actual returns of the fund for 5 years. We will um, um, we'll take out the negatives from the difference and find out the standard deviation for those negatives. Let me let me share the formula for it. Um, First, you deduct, that is expected market return minus uh, actual returns. You find out the difference between this two returns. Square the negatives. Find out the standard deviation. And you find out the normal. You use a normal standard deviation formula to find out the variance between the expected and the actuals. Now you have two values. One is a normal standard deviation, which is calculated for the whole entire data set. The data set in this year indicates the actual values and the expected values, and the negative. When you calculate downside risk by taking out the negatives of the difference between actual and expected returns, and find out the standard deviation for it. Now, let us say standard deviation for the fund is say 10. Downside risk, which is nothing but a standard deviation calculated based on the negative values, is around 5. We can say that the downside risk ratio is 50%. It means that there is 50% chance that your portfolio return would fall below the minimum acceptable level, or the minimum acceptable level, or the threshold value. Threshold or the risk-free return. So you will say that you can say that this mutual fund has a possibility of 50% possibility of generating returns below risk-free value. I'll take risk-free value as my FD option. So it has 50% chance of falling below my risk-free return. Let us take another instance where the downside risk ratio is 20%, and 20%. It means that there is a 20% possibility that my fund would generate a return lower than the desired return. So option B is a better choice. It becomes a better investment choice. It's not complex. It is very simple. So there are ways to capture downside risk. Again, I just want to I want to give an analogy for downside risk. I'll take cricket as an example again. Let us say batsman average is 50 and the standard deviation is 20%. Means that scores fall between 40 and 60. There is another batsman who has an average of consistently who has an average of 50, has a standard deviation of um, 10%, which means that his scores fall between 45 and 55. I am happy with uh, I'm happy with 40 as the average. I mean, so what I do is I'll find out what is the possibility of uh, um, for 40 is my desired return. I'll find out downside risk is used for finding out whether uh, whether the actual returns, I mean in this case actual returns, that is uh, will fall below 45. What are the chances of of the actual returns falling below 45? If it is 90%, I would drop the investment. um, I would go for go for a batsman who averages 40 with a minimum, with a downside risk of say 10%. So I think I should have got the concept by now. So downside risk explains, gives you an insight about the worst. Gives you insight on the possible returns when the market is not performing up to when the market is down. So it also depends. It also defines the capability of the fund manager during. What to say? Defines the capabilities of your fund manager during bad times. Bad times, not technical. Not the stock market jargon. It means that market is not performing. So you expect the fund manager, a good fund manager would have alternate investment choices to counter possible to counter volatility in the market. So downside risk ratio is very, very important because it gives you a measure of the possible returns. It gives you a measure. Gives you a measure of the possible returns. Sorry, I want to rephrase it. Very important because it talks about the possibilities of the fund generating a return below a threshold value or a desired value. Desired value is very, very important because investor, I would lose out if I do not know the probability of fund generating return below the threshold value. I would, as an investor, I would my choice, from an investor point of view, from investor point of view, the investment becomes a bad choice. Investor would have generated that minimum threshold return from an alternate source, or risk-free return from a FD or post office or RD. So you should know the downside risk of a fund. It's one of the, contributes. It's one of the key investment decision. It also defines your fund manager capability to counter volatility in the market. So downside risk is downside risk ratio is very important. Um, uh, very important in deciding your investment choices. So let us say I'll give you one more example. Let us compare two similar funds. One has a downside ratio of say 2, downside risk ratio of 2, other has a downside risk ratio of 3. I would go for a fund which has a downside ratio of 3. I mean, I would choose a fund with a with a downside risk ratio of 3. So it helps you in deciding the right investment. So this is about downside risk ratio. There are different types of downside risk ratio. One is Roy's safety criterion method, which I mean which would give you insights on the on the possibility of the fund generating a return that is greater than the threshold value. Here a value is chosen. It's an arbitrary value. Say I'm happy with 10%. Somebody is happy with 12%. In the sense, I'm talking about expectations of the fund. What Roy's safe criterion does is it calculates the difference between your desired value or the minimum threshold, minimum acceptable return. That is, we can take it as FD. This is what I'm expected to receive. That is what I'm expected to receive. From a safe investment. What Roy's safe criterion deducts the expected return from MAR, as minimum acceptable return, and divides the ratio and divides the difference, and the difference is divided by the standard deviation between the actuals and the threshold value. So again, investment with a higher Roy safety criteria is considered as a good choice. So I tried my best to explain this downside risk ratio. I always look out for this for these numbers. Let me recap it. Downside risk ratio measures the possibility of your mutual fund return falling below a threshold value. For instance, thanks. For instance, I gave an example of how downside risk is calculated. It is calculated by finding out the difference between minimum expected value or the expected returns and the actual values, and the negatives are separate. If it returns a negative number, standard deviation is found out for these negative numbers. I gave an example for a data set that is a standard deviation of 10%, and as a downside risk ratio of 5%, means that there's a 50% chance, 5 by 10, and 50% chance of the fund generating a return above threshold value, or in sense there's a 50% chance of the fund generating a return below the threshold value. So 50% um, of the returns comes from bad volatility, and 50% comes from the good volatility. Um, so then I spoke about Roy's safe criterion fund. Criterion for Roy's safety first criterion downside risk formula, which takes a minimum threshold value and deducts the actuals, and difference is divided by the standard deviation. You find, it's used for comparing two investment choices or two mutual funds, one with higher ratio is would be the preferred choice for investment. Thank you. Namaskar. Nandri.